to introduce, after Ms. Dexa's very nice presentation on Indonesian food regulations, I would like to take you on a global journey on food contact material and ink regulations. And let's start right away. Look, this is here a global scale on food contact material regulations. And you see, if you see the spread here around the globe, every country, basically every region maintains food contact material regulations. Whether we look here at the Americas, whether we look at Europe, or Europe, Middle East and Africa, or whether we look here in Asia, every country has its own food contact material regulations. However, if we take a little bit more detailed look on the principles, how these regulations are built up, there are major differences. And as a very common principle, we find the framework principle in many of these regulations worldwide. Framework principle, what does it mean? Well, it does basically say there shall be no harmful migration into the food via the packaging materials. There shall be no change of the food composition. No organoleptic effect is also very important. Talking about printing with solvents, organoleptic effects can matter. And and these are the most common principles which you will find almost in every food contact material regulation worldwide. If you then take it to the next step, which is less common, you find regulations on the food contact materials via the use either of the positive list principle or negative list principle for chemicals. And then, if it's, and we have heard here from Indonesia, if you take it a step further, you even find the permission of usage depending on the overall or specific migration limit, whilst the specific migration limit determines the maximum allowed quantity of migrants in the food when the food still can be assessed being safe. But this principle is less common. And then, very rare, on the global scale, you find regulations on food packaging inks, either via positive or negative list principle, again also partly stipulated by the migrants by migration limits. So that is very rare. And if we take it, if you look on the development of the regulations, there, as a first ink regulation worldwide, there was the Swiss ordinance, which was introduced in 2005. So, it makes sense now to take a more specific look on positive and negative list principle. I've introduced this term, and let's look at the advantages of such regulation via positive list or negative list, and at the disadvantages. Let's start with the positive list. Well, a positive list, evidently, as the name says, positive list, it gives a clear instruction on intentionally usable substances, often combined with a tolerable exposure. Tolerable exposure for the consumer via the migration limit. And that means there is no need for any operator to do an individual risk assessment. However, now with the positive aspects, also the negative aspects come. And well, it's a matter of fact that those positive lists often are incomplete and are not reflecting the present market needs. It's very difficult to introduce a substance on a positive list, and therefore most positive lists are, though they pretend to be comprehensive, they don't represent the market needs. And that leads to a blocking of new developments, because the developments in the packaging business are very rapid, and if you don't get material on the positive list, it's blocking your own development. The other problem which we find when we have stipulation of migration limits, so permissive exposure, we see often lacking standardized methodologies for analyzing the specific migrants. Yeah? You know, analytics are various, analytical equipment is very diverse, and so often the question arises, well, which is the standard methodology? Now let's have a look on the negative list. Well, positive as an advantage, you see, well, there's clarity on what is banned, because it's a negative list. So negative list stipulates those materials which were not allowed to be used. And however, it means it's normally a very small list, a very condensed list. It means then also flexibility for individual raw material choices besides this negative list. And there's no need for migration testing, so it's kind of the easy way. However, as a disadvantage, there is generally a lower safety aspiration level and thus a higher risk for consumer. Yeah? And more responsibility is delegated to the business operators, and that may lead to gray areas. So, let's leave that consideration now between positive and negative list, and let's have a look into some practical stipulations, legal stipulations around the world. And I would like to start with the European legislation, which seems to be the most advanced. And when we talk about European legislation, we are not talking about one individual country legislation, no. We are talking about 27 member countries all at once, which are regulated by this common law. So, and the legislation here is kind of demonstrated by this tree. The trunk of the tree is the framework regulation, with a framework principle, yeah, the EU 1935-2004. And if you then go to the tree top, you see that there are specific measures for certain materials, like for example plastic material, yeah, or regenerative cellulose film. So these regulations are positive list principle based. But if you go to the shots at the top, you see, and you will immediately recognize that there are aspects which are not yet regulated in Europe. Like, for example, printing inks. There is no specific European regulation yet for printing inks. There is also no regulation, for example, for paper and board materials, which also play a very important role in the food contact material chain. The printing ink regulation is announced, however, for about 2026, 2027, it will come, but it's not yet there. There's only very rough discussions. So, after this look on the European regulations for 27 member countries, let's have a more specific look, and there's always a deviation to the rule. Yeah? I just said there is no ink regulation in Europe, and that seems to be contradictory to this slide here, where we have Swiss regulations. Well, you can say, okay, Switzerland is not member of the European Union, it's true, but there is this regulation since 2005. Latest version is 1st of October 2022. And the scope is printing inks, respectively printed material, however, intentionally added substances, and indirect food contact. And the positive is based on the positive list principle. More than 5,000 materials are listed in the positive list. So it's quite comprehensive. A major revision, by the way, is expected by next year. And that will then change the setup of this Swiss ordinance considerably. Now let's have a look at the member country of the European Union, Germany. Yeah, and in Germany there's a deviation. Yeah, there is a German ink ordinance that has been published in December 2021. However, it's not yet enforced. The enforcement is foreseen for 1st of January 2026. So there is basically a 4 years transition period. And the scope is slightly different. You see it's intentionally added substances, yes, positive list principle, direct and indirect food contact. So also direct food contact. And the positive list principle is not that big, so it's a little bit more than 1,000 substances. Non-listed substances, you may ask, okay, well, if the Swiss have stipulated 5,000 materials, 1,000 materials in Germany, there may be a gap. And what about non-listed substances? How can I play with them? Well, non-listed substances are allowed if the migration remains below 10 ppb, and these substances are not CMR, carcinogenic, mutagenic, reprotoxic, and if they are not used in direct food contact applications. So, as you see, differences and partly very specific. Now, what about other parts of the world? You see, for example, USA. Yeah? USA, we have the Code of Federal Regulations, the Title 21, with framework regulation and regulation for so-called indirect food additives. Indirect food additives, which are meant to be migrants. There is no specific printing ink regulation, but also in the United States, there are some considerations now ongoing to establish such a printing ink regulation for food contact materials. China, another big player in the globe. Yeah? What about China? Well, China has this so-called GB4806 and then the GB9685. The 4806 is a framework regulation, and there is a printing ink standard with the GB9685, A part A4, well, also quite detailed. And this is set to be revised in 2024. Yeah, there is a very specific printing ink regulation for printing inks for food contact materials. Yeah, South America, we have Mercosur. This is kind of like the Asian group, Mercosur, several countries belonging to it. And they have a framework regulation and basically have taken over the European regulations, and there is no specific printing regulation. Now, I have already mentioned it. We are here in Jakarta. We see today the last day of the ASEAN country conference, that is quite interesting, of course, to mention here that the ASEAN community has also general guidelines on food contact materials. The general principles are, again, the framework principle, as we all know, yeah, concerning printing inks, it stipulates printing inks should only be applied to the non-food contact side of food contact materials and not come into direct contact with food. So this is ASEAN and it's a guideline. Now, as we have heard, there are implementations, national implementations of the rule. We have, I don't want to repeat what Ms. Dexa has been explaining for Indonesia, but all the neighbor countries, whether we go to Vietnam, to Thailand, to Malaysia, or to the Philippines here, to the neighbor countries, to Indonesia, they all have kind of this framework principle, which is implemented there. And they are, like for example, Vietnam, also partially thinking about implementing a specific ink standard for inks for food contact materials. We are talking here all the time this morning already about food safety and food packaging safety. we have been hearing from Mr. Vivara that there have been scandals. Yeah, indeed, there have been scandals. There have been also scandals in Europe. There have been scandals here in Southeast Asia. And with these rapid alert systems, which have been implemented around the globe in the different regions, these scandals do not remain secret. Yeah? So they are popping up to the general public, they are popping up to the NGOs, to the consumer organizations, and they are very worried. Yeah? And it's a very important tool, these rapid alert systems, whether it's here the European rapid alert system for food and feed, where you regularly can find withdrawals from the market of the authorities, imports, partially also from Asia, and which is then announced there publicly. Everybody can read it. Also, by the way, these rapid alert systems are open to the general public, as I said. So the consumers can then make a decision whether they want to buy or not to buy. Also here in the ASEAN countries, there is this rapid alert system called a little bit different, ARASFF, and also the United States do have such an alert system. I think it's very important to bear that in mind. When we're talking food safety, it is a public topic and is a topic of consumer interest. Well, we have heard about legislation existing in different parts of the world. The question, of course, pops up, well, is legislation the only important driver for food safety, or are there other drivers? And evidently, there are other drivers. And one very important driver for food safety are the brand owners. Just listed here two brand owners, Nestle and Perfetti Famelle, who are running global guidelines for printing inks for food contact materials. And since these are global guidelines, these global guidelines have a global impact, even there in those countries where there is no specific printing ink regulation. So that's very important, so to recognize as a supplier into the market that these guidelines are existing, and they are very, very specific. And they consist of also negative list and negative list recommendations and stipulations of specific migration limits. But besides the brand owners, there are also the non-governmental organizations, the NGOs, and they are really making a difference, more and more. I just quoted here the Food Packaging Forum. It's an organization located in Switzerland, and they are talking about a database of 12,000 chemicals used in food contact materials. And of course, they are seeing a risk, and they are giving the industry a hard time, I must say. Yeah? There's also these non-governmental organization called Food Watch. It's just examples. There are more of these non-governmental organizations, but Food Watch, which has put forward the mineral oil issue in foodstuff, and there are other NGOs which are fostering now the PFAS discussion, and more to come. So, now let's have a look after having seen the regulatory stipulations, the brand owners and the NGOs. Now let's see how the cooperation along the supply chain works. Supply chain for food contact materials is quite complex. And from the legal point of view, I think it's very important to see that in the end, the brand owners, they are those who are held responsible for the compliance of the products brought on the market. Legislation would stipulate the brand owners to be those ones who are introducing the products to the market. So, the brand owners, in order to safeguard their responsibility and to execute their responsibility, they are advised to create systematic and standardized specifications for upstream suppliers, just to be on the safe side. And then the next level is the converters. And the converters who are putting together, who are producing a food contact material, a printed packaging, they have many suppliers. They have substrate suppliers, they have ink suppliers, and and they have coating suppliers, they have adhesive suppliers. So in the end, they need to safeguard that they have the respective information at hand in order to satisfy the need of their customers, the brand owners. And they also need to have proper information from the brand owner for what application a certain packaging is to be used. Baby food, direct food contact, whatever. It all makes a difference. And then finally, those suppliers to the converters, like the ink suppliers, for example, in this case I'm talking as an ink supplier, they have to safeguard that they are sending and they are supplying a tailor-made ink system, tailor-made according to the needs of the specific applications. And what is very important, and that's what we execute, transparency. Transparency is paramount. Transparency of information to the converter via taking a data sheet and so-called statements of composition. I think you will have a more detailed look later on when my colleague is introducing this. So this is this complex value chain where every partner of the value chain holds an individual responsibility, and everybody should cooperate and should exchange information up and down this value chain. So, I have just selected an example for Siegwerk, if I may. And our motto is going beyond regulations. I have shown it here with this glass. Yeah? We are filling the glass to its top. Of course, the bottom, the basis is compliance, legal compliance to the relevant and pertinent legislation, national legislation around the world. But on top, we're filling the glass to the top, are the voluntary self-commitments, which we are executing at global scale. It doesn't matter whether we do it in Indonesia, whether we do it in the United States, in Germany, in China, wherever in the world, we have self-commitments. And these self-commitments are described by a so-called exclusion policy in our claim for safest inks. This is not just what we just say and pretend to do. No, we are walking the talk. We are not using toluene in NPH, we call NPH, which is nutrition, pharma, hygiene applications worldwide. We are on the path of phase out of stipulated materials like PFAS, like benzophenone, all that kind of stuff, and I could tell you much, much more, but that's how we see it. These self-commitments are really important, and that's also what I would like to say. Legislation is giving a framework, but I think it's important what the single operators down the supply chain are doing and how they are filling this framework, this legal framework. And that's how we do it. Well, let me give an outlook. Let me give an outlook on the global trends on packaging safety. I think it's important to see how things will develop. What is for sure is that more and more countries are developing their own food contact material legislation. And one catchword, which you please bear in mind, will be inherently safe. Food contact materials need to be inherently safe. It's a very big claim, yeah? Inherently safe. It's going almost into the direction of almost being inert. And this is something which will come in the future, and this is where the journey will go. Yeah? And and if you think about that, and if you think about the consumers and their demands and the future of our children, you would also say, well, yeah, it's warranted, yeah, it's clear, yeah. So that's one trend. The other trend, which we will see, is more and more toxicological know-how will be revealed about potential migrants. There's a lot of scientific work ongoing, and you can basically summarize this by the term substances of concern. Substances of concern, which would mean carcinogenicity, genotoxicity, reprotoxicity, but also endocrine disruptions, and also, as you say, PBT, Mr. Vibara, yeah, persistence, bioaccumulative toxic materials, yeah, PBT materials. Yeah, this is the discussion which we will have to face and which will basically determine the future of food contact material legislation. Another trend which you will see is more and more countries will establish specific regulations on inks for food contact materials. I've given you some examples. The EU, it's still a way to go, 2026, 2027, the United States, but China next year, Vietnam, Bangladesh, for example, after India, but you will hear about that later from my colleague. And and finally, the final trend I would like to describe, and it has already been mentioned by Mr. Yubaba today, circularity. Circularity, yeah, this is a must these days. Circularity, absolutely important, also vital for our future, whether for plastic materials and whether for paper and cardboard materials. But here I focus on the plastic materials. It's, of course, the wish is there. A food contact material shall be recycled into a food contact material. This is a big wish, because in between is collection, is the processing, and the processing is via mechanical recycling, and mechanical recycling would apply temperatures up to 260, 280 degrees centigrade. That means that all ingredients which are in the plastic material are subjected to these high temperatures. Do we know, are they stable? Yeah? Or is it not very likely that side products will be produced and will then impair the quality and the suitability of this plastic material? And therefore, this is a big question of these days, it's very clear that the authorities globally, around the globe, will have to extend into that and will have to determine what they consider safe practices. And of course, we know at this very moment there is an established value chain of PET, rPET, recycled PET, but of course the big wish is to extend it to the polyolefins as well. And let's see how that develops. It's a very tough discussion, very interesting discussion. And I think at a later stage, probably a seminar like that could be done on that topic. Yeah? With that, I would like to end. Thank you very much for your attention.